In this video, I'm going to reveal my top 10 wines from 2025. These are not new releases, nor do they include some of the best values of 2025. Rather, they're simply the best of the best. If you have some favorite wines that you'd like to share with us, please let me know in the comments below. Based in Côte-Rôtie in France's northern Rhône region, Domaine Guigal produces not just some of the most revered wines from this region, but some world-class wines. While they have excellent wines at all price points, the crown jewel in their lineup is the so-called Lala trilogy, La Mouline, Le Turc, and La Landon. Each of these wines offer a distinct expression of Syrah from Côte-Rôtie's steep slopes, ancient soils, and meticulous winemaking from Guigal. So it was a real treat to have a chance to compare all three Lala wines from the outstanding 1988 vintage a few weeks ago. While all these wines were pristine bottles and at their peak, two of the wines stood out from the rest. So coming in at number 10 in my top 10 wines of 2025 is the 1988 Guigal Le Turc. Le Turc is 93% Syrah, and there's 7% Viognier, which is a white grape that's co-fermented and blended in. The fruit for this wine comes from a steep, iron-rich parcel located on the Haut-Brion. This wine featured flavors and aromas of dark cherry, plum, raspberry, smoked meat, game, spice, and there was a real savory edge to this wine that I really enjoyed. While all three of the wines were excellent, compared to the wine that finished third that night, this one had a little bit more nuance and also some additional complexity and a slightly longer finish. Next up is a wine that was presented to me blind towards the end of the night. With one nose, I knew that I was in for a real treat, and with one sip, I knew that this wine was going to be a shoo-in for my top 25 wines of 2025. Due to the elegance, intensity, and complexity of this wine, I immediately knew that it was an extremely high-quality Burgundy from a top producer. I further guessed that it was wine that had about 20 to 25 years of age on it. In the end, I ultimately guessed that this was a Vosne Romanée with about 20 to 25 years of age from a top Burgundy producer. While I was not correct, I was not far off. So coming in at number 9 in my top 25 wines of 2025 is the 2002 Domaine Maison Clos de Vouge Grand Cru. Clos de Vouge is a vast walled vineyard that has around 125 acres in total planted to vine. It's divided into around 100 plots or so, and there's more than 80 different producers that have parcels. Quality for Clos de Vouge can vary wildly depending on the producer's plot and also their approach to winemaking. Of course, Maison has some plots in prime locations, and their winemaking is top-notch. 2002 was an extremely strong vintage for Burgundy, and this wine was absolutely firing on all cylinders. On the palate, this wine was extremely intense, yet very well balanced as well. There was ample acidity and an incredibly long, complex finish. This was a mineral-driven wine with flavors and aromas that included cherry, truffle, forest floor, mixed spice, and much more. This wine had an incredibly silky texture and was a real treat to taste, a wine that haunted me for several days afterwards. While most people are aware that Chateau Haut-Brion produces one of the world's greatest red wines, they also produce one of the great white wines in the world. Unfortunately, this is a wine that's made in extremely small quantities and can be very elusive to track down. Typically, they only produce around 5,000 bottles of it annually. It's always a memorable experience to taste Haut-Brion Blanc, so I was extremely excited a few months ago when I had the opportunity to attend a Clarence Dillon masterclass where we tried most of the wines in the Clarence Dillon lineup, including the outstanding 2010 Chateau Haut-Brion Blanc, which comes in at number 8 in my top 10 wines of 2025. The highly acclaimed 2010 Chateau Haut-Brion Blanc is a blend that consists of 54% Sauvignon Blanc and 46% Semillon. This wine matured in 46% New French oak. While many people enjoy Sauvignon Blanc by the pool in the summertime, this wine is definitely not your typical porch pounder and is absolutely one of the most elite white wines in the world. This was an impeccably balanced wine with incredible depth and purity of fruit and a long, complex finish. This wine featured flavors and aromas of citrus, pear, toasted almond, wax, crushed stone, and much more. If you haven't had a chance to taste Haut-Brion Blanc yet, it should absolutely be on your bucket list. While most 57-year-old wines are way past peak and no longer enjoyable, the wine that comes in at number 7 in my top 10 wines of 2025 is definitely an exception. This is a wine that was so special, it was selected to represent Spain on the world stage. Specifically, this historic bottle was first presented on a royal ship back in 1987 to commemorate King Philippe VI's first overseas visit. 38 years later, I was humbled that Marques de Murrieta chose to share this special bottle with me during a recent visit to their winery. This is the 1968 Marques de Murrieta Castillo Guigal Rioja Gran Reserva Especial. This is a Tempranillo dominant blend that matured for an amazing 13 years in oak before it was finally released. This was an absolutely magical wine with plenty of life left. On the nose, and in terms of the texture and body, it reminded me of an extremely high-end Burgundy. Flavors and aromas included sherry, tobacco, cedar, and leather. This wine still had structure left, and it had a long, extremely complex finish. Even after more than 5 decades, this wine is still vibrant, elegant, and complex. Chateau Rayas was established by Albert Reynaud way back in 1880 after he lost his hearing and could no longer operate his notary public business. In 1997, Emmanuel Reynaud took over for his uncle Jacques and began operating Chateau Rayas. Unfortunately, Emmanuel passed away earlier this year. Rayas has a small 12-hectare vineyard that's located in the middle of a forest. While Châteauneuf-du-Pape is known for being extremely warm, especially recently, due to sandy soils, northeastern exposure, and large trees surrounding the vineyard, Chateau Rayas' vines are located in a microclimate that's known for being extremely cool. As a result, Rayas produces extremely elegant wines with lots more freshness and acidity and less alcohol than the vast majority of Châteauneuf-du-Pape wines. Unlike most wines from Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Chateau Rayas is not a blend. It's 100% Grenache, and this Grenache comes from some extremely old vines. Coming at number 6 in my top 10 wines of 2025 is the 2008 Chateau Rayas. While 2008 is not known for being an exceptional vintage in Châteauneuf-du-Pape overall, we found that this is definitely an extremely strong vintage for Rayas. In fact, we did a 7-vintage vertical of some of the best recent vintages of Rayas last year, and the 2008 vintage came in first that night. Earlier this year, we had a chance to try this wine again at the end of a very long group tasting that had some formidable competition, but again, the 2008 Rayas stole the show. This wine featured flavors and aromas of raspberry, strawberry, licorice, cedar, and garrigue. This was an absolutely breathtaking wine. Somewhat oxymoronically, this wine was intensely ethereal. There was abundant acidity to balance the concentrated and intense fruit flavors, and there was an extremely long, complex finish. If you haven't tried Rayas yet, it should definitely be on your bucket list. It reminds me a lot of an extremely high-end Grand Cru Burgundy, but with more spice. Earlier this year, Carol Andre, who's the cellar master for Chateau Cheval Blanc, came to Dallas and conducted a special masterclass. During that masterclass, we were able to try 3 special vintages of Chateau Cheval Blanc, the iconic Right Bank winery. Specifically, we tried the 2006, 2010, and 2014 vintages. While all these wines were very enjoyable, the 2010 was undeniably the best of the trio. In fact, this is wine that's received at least 5 perfect 100-point scores from top critics, and I would definitely have to agree that this is an extremely special wine. Despite its youth, I would definitely give this wine some of the highest marks I've given to any wine this year. If you're fortunate enough to have this wine in your cellar, I would definitely resist the temptation to open it, however, as it's still extremely youthful and has a very long life ahead of it. In fact, I think this definitely should be in the running for one of the best all-time vintages of Chateau Cheval Blanc, which is certainly saying a lot. Compared to the other 2 wines in the lineup, while this wine is nowhere near its peak yet, it absolutely had more of everything that I'm looking for when I score a wine. It had more intensity, more concentration, more numerous descriptors, more precise descriptors, better balance, more acidity and freshness, and a much longer complex finish. This wine is just practically perfect in every way. I think this wine is still at least 15 to 20 years from reaching its peak, so I definitely hope to revisit this wine down the road. But it's absolutely deserving of a spot as the number 5 wine in my top 10 wines of 2025. Earlier in this video, I mentioned the 1988 Guigal Lala tasting that we conducted several weeks ago. The Le Turc finished number 2 in that tasting and finished number 10 in my top 10 wines for 2025, but there's another wine that comes in at number 4. With respect to the Lala trilogy, La Landon is always the most powerful wine, as that wine is 100% Syrah. Le Turc comes in at the middle with 93% Syrah and typically around 7% Viognier or so. La Mouline is definitely the most elegant of the trio. La Mouline consists of around 11% Viognier most vintages and 89% Syrah. In addition, the fruit for this wine comes from a warmer, sunny area on the Haut-Brion, and they use a more gentle extraction technique for La Mouline as well. As such, La Mouline tends to be the most elegant and expressive of the trio. It also tends to be my favorite, and that was certainly the case in our 1988 tasting as well. All the wines were showing so well, it took a long time for me to pick a favorite. But after comparing these wines closely and seeing how they evolved over the course of the night, La Mouline just had a little bit extra in terms of elegance, finesse, and complexity. There were more discrete descriptors, and the finish was slightly longer. But you really can't go wrong with any of these wines. All 3 of them had that unmistakable savory quality, including those intriguing notes of smoked meat, game, and spice. Really a treat to taste all of these wines. Fans of the Guigal Lala wines will also be pleased to note that there's a 4th Lala wine in the works. This wine should be coming out in 2026. This wine will be called La Reynarde, and it will be from the 2022 vintage. So definitely keep an eye out for that one. First crafted as an experimental wine back in 1951, Penfolds Grange has gone on to become one of the most coveted collectible wines, not just in Australia, but in the entire world. While this wine is Shiraz dominant, many vintages also include a small amount of Cabernet Sauvignon, which helps to add depth, structure, and a little bit more complexity. The only problem that I have with Penfolds Grange is that this wine is so extraordinarily age-worthy, it's very, very difficult to find a bottle at its peak. Fortunately, earlier this year, our group was able to source 4 older vintages of Penfolds Grange. Better still, these were some of the most epic vintages of Penfolds Grange ever produced. Included in our tasting were the 1971, 1976, 1980, and 1986 vintages. These were all pristine bottles from original wooden cases, and these were the first bottles ever opened and consumed from those cases. My second favorite wine of this tasting was the 1986 vintage, which was still extremely youthful and powerful, and perhaps not even at its peak yet. That wine made my top 25 list this year and was discussed in a previous video. But coming in at number 3 in my top 10 wines of 2025 is the legendary 1971 Penfolds Grange, which many believe to be among the greatest vintages of Grange ever produced. While the 1986 was a little bit more powerful and fruit-forward, the 1971 definitely still had some fruit left. What this wine lacked in power was more than compensated with extreme complexity and elegance. The aromatics for this wine were absolutely haunting. So haunting, in fact, that even after my tasting portion was finished, I saved my glass just so I could keep nosing it for a little while after the tasting was over. In terms of flavors and aromas, the fruit profile started out to be a little bit dark, but with some air, the red fruit definitely came out as well. There were also some smoked meat notes and lots of complexity in terms of tertiary descriptors like earth, mixed spice, and much more. There was a bit of a menthol, eucalyptus quality as well, but this was somewhat subtle in this wine. There's no doubt in my mind that this wine is deserving of its spot as the number 3 wine in my top 10 wines of 2025. Back in 1985, Back to the Future was one of the year's highest grossing movies. Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears was one of the year's biggest hits, and the fruit for the special wine that comes in at number 2 in my top 10 wines of 2025 was Harvested. Fortunately, however, we did not need a time machine to enjoy this wine, as this wine was showing extremely well despite being 40 years of age. We enjoyed this wine on a pop and pour, and the aromatics burst from the glass. This wine featured pronounced aromatic intensity, incredible purity of fruit, an extremely silky, elegant texture, and a long, complex finish that lingered for close to a minute or more. Descriptors for this wine included dried cherry, rose petals, forest floor, and mixed spice. There were 8 of us who each chipped in to purchase this special wine, and our tasting portions continued to evolve in the glass for 75 to 90 minutes while we enjoyed it. This was the 1985 Maison Leroy Chambertin Grand Cru, a very, very special wine that I hope to be able to revisit at some point in the future. Now it's time for me to reveal the wine of the year. This was a wine that we tasted the same night that we had the 1988 Guigal Lala tasting. One of the reasons that I'm a big fan of those tastings is because in addition to the main event, we typically also bring some special bottles to enjoy both before and especially after those big tastings. This is a wine that was presented to me blind while I was still enjoying the comparison tasting of the Guigal Lala wines. At the time, someone asked me what my favorite wine of the night was. They meant with respect to the 3 Guigal wines, but my response was that I think whatever is in my glass is definitely my favorite wine of the night. While I wasn't sure exactly what it was definitely somewhat familiar, and I knew that it was an extremely special, world-class wine that was even a level up from the 3 Guigal Lala wines. And as the great Ric Flair says, to be the man, you've got to beat the man. And with this wine beating those 3 Lalas, that went a long way towards my determination that this was my wine of the year. This is a wine that we enjoyed on a pop and pour, and within 20 to 30 minutes in the glass, it was absolutely singing. While this wine was not particularly fruit-forward, there were dried red and black fruit notes, but the predominant notes were more of a gravel, mineral quality. There was also graphite and cedar. On the palate, this wine was incredibly silky with layer after layer of flavor. There was incredible depth and a breathtakingly long finish. Truly a remarkable special wine. Due to the gravelly nature and the rest of the characteristics for this wine, I ultimately guessed that it was a 1982 Latour. While I was not correct, I was extraordinarily close. I got the vintage right and also the appellation. But I was off by just a few meters, as this was the 1982 Pichon Longueville Comtesse de Lalande, which is from Chateau Latour's neighbor. A few years ago, I was a little bit concerned this wine had passed peak, but tasting this wine certainly gives me renewed confidence that this wine certainly still has a long life ahead of it. It's just a little bit of a different type of wine now than it was before, as the fruit no longer predominates. But you can still enjoy an extremely complex world-class wine, and each glorious sip of this wine reveals layer after layer of incredible graphite and cedar-infused flavors. This wine is certainly a very well-deserving Wine of the Year for 2025. If you haven't seen the rest of my top 25 wines from 2025, be sure to check out this video where I discuss wines number 11 through 25.